The conference room smelled like cold coffee and something older. Maybe money, maybe the particular kind of contempt that only people with money can afford. My father sat at the head of the table like he always had, like gravity worked differently around him. My stepmother was beside him in a cream blazer I'm sure she'd bought specifically for this occasion. Their attorney had one of those faces that looks permanently prepared to deliver bad news to people who deserve it. I sat across from them alone. My own attorney was running 7 minutes late. I know because I checked my watch 4 times. Nobody offered me water. She doesn't need to be here, my stepmother said. Not to me. Not exactly to anyone. Just out loud, like a fact she was reading from a document. The estate is straightforward. There's nothing here that concerns her. My father glanced at me once and then looked away. We can proceed without making this complicated. I thought about the drive down. 4 hours from Fort Bragg. I'd left before dawn, in my civvies, which felt strange, like showing up to a fight without armor. I stopped once for gas outside of Fayetteville and drank a terrible cup of coffee standing next to my car in the cold because I needed the air more than I needed to sit down. I was 31 years old. I had spent the last 9 years serving as a military intelligence officer. I had been in places I am not allowed to name, had made decisions that other people's lives depended on, had learned to sit very still in very difficult rooms and say nothing until I knew exactly what needed to be said. I sat still now. The attorney, his name was Gideon Marsh. I'd looked him up, shuffled his papers and said, "Perhaps we should wait for." "We don't need to wait," my father said. "She's not a party to this estate. She's not in the will. She's here as a courtesy." A courtesy. I was here because my mother had died 11 weeks ago, and because she had spent the last 3 years of her life making sure I would be protected, and because my father and his wife had spent those same 3 years trying to make sure I wouldn't be. Let me tell you who my mother was, because this story doesn't make sense without her. Her name was Suzanne. She grew up in Raleigh, the daughter of a man who repaired appliances and a woman who taught second grade. She was the first person in her family to finish college. She put herself through nursing school working doubles at a diner on weekends, and she met my father at the hospital where she worked when he came in with a broken wrist from a racquetball accident. She used to tell that story and laugh. "He was the worst patient I ever had," she'd say. Complained the whole time. I almost didn't give him my number. She did, though. And they married, and they had me, and for a while I think it was good. I don't have many memories of them together. I was 6 when they separated. But I remember a yellow kitchen, and my parents laughing at something on the news, and my father throwing me over his shoulder and pretending to drop me while I screamed and giggled. I hold on to that, not because it makes what came later okay, just because it happened, and it was real. The divorce was the kind that leaves marks. My father had money by then. He'd built a small commercial real estate business from nothing, which I'll give him, he'd actually worked for it. And my mother had me and a nursing salary and a 1-bedroom apartment in Cary, where I slept in the bedroom and she slept on a pull-out sofa for almost 2 years before she saved enough for a 2-bedroom. She never talked badly about him to me. Not once. When I'd come home from weekends at his house quiet and strange, she'd make us dinner and put on a movie and let me find my way back to myself without asking too many questions. She was good at that, knowing when to hold on and when to give space. My father remarried when I was 9. His wife had 2 children of her own, a boy and a girl, both younger than me. Suddenly there was a family that fit together in a way I didn't quite fit into, and visits became shorter, and phone calls became less frequent, and somewhere around my 14th birthday I stopped counting the times he forgot. I wasn't angry, exactly. Or maybe I was angry in the way you're angry at rain. It wasn't personal, it just was. My mother got sick when I was 27. Ovarian cancer, caught later than anyone wanted, treated aggressively with the particular determination my mother brought to everything. She fought it for 3 years. During that time, she also, quietly and without drama, revised her estate plan. She had a small house in Cary, paid off by then. She had retirement savings. She had a life insurance policy she'd kept up for 30 years. She left it all to me. She also, because she was my mother and she thought of everything, put the house and the majority of her financial assets into a revocable living trust with me as the sole beneficiary. She did this with a very good estate attorney named Agnes Whitfield, who had spent 40 years making sure that people like my mother, people who had earned what they had, quietly, without anyone's help, kept it. My father's name appeared nowhere in any of these documents. It didn't need to. They had been divorced for 22 years. The problem was a savings account. My mother had opened it decades ago when they were still married. It was listed jointly. She had meant to remove his name. Agnes told me later that they had discussed it, that it was on the list, but she had run out of time. The account had maybe $40,000 in it, not a fortune. But enough, and my father's attorney had found it. That's why we were here. Not in probate court, that's where the story gets important, because a lot of people don't realize that when assets are held in trust, they don't go through probate at all. The trust transferred to me automatically. The house was mine. The retirement accounts, which had me named as beneficiary directly, were mine. The life insurance was mine. The only thing in question was that one account. And my father had decided that the account was a foothold, that if he could establish some claim to it, he could challenge the broader estate. His attorney had sent a letter 2 months ago suggesting that my mother's trust might be invalid due to something called undue influence, the legal theory that someone had pressured her into changing her estate plan. The someone, implied but never stated, was me. I read that letter sitting in my car in the parking lot of the commissary on post. I read it twice. Then I called Agnes Whitfield, and she said, in the calm voice of a woman who had seen everything, "Let them file. They won't get anywhere, but we should meet." We met. We prepared, and then I drove 4 hours in the dark to sit in a conference room and be told I didn't need to be there. The joint account, Gideon Marsh said carefully, does carry my client's name. Under state law. I'm aware of what state law says, I said. Everyone looked at me. I think they'd half forgotten I could speak. The account was opened in 1991, I continued. My mother made 17 deposits over the last 2 years of her life. My father made 0. There has been no joint activity on that account in over a decade. The original joint designation was an administrative artifact from a marriage that ended in 2003. I paused. I have documentation for all of that. My stepmother's expression didn't change, but something shifted around her eyes. My father leaned forward. Nobody is disputing that your mother worked hard. I know she did, I said. I watched her do it. But there are legitimate legal questions here about. About what? I asked. I kept my voice even. I had learned that the quieter you are, the more people have to lean in to hear you, and when they lean in, they lose something, some posture, some certainty. About the trust, Agnes Whitfield has practiced estate law in this state for 40 years. The trust is properly executed and witnessed. The undue influence claim has no basis because my mother made these changes in 2021 before her diagnosis significantly progressed, with full cognitive capacity, confirmed by her oncologist and 2 independent witnesses. I set my folder on the table. I can go through all of it if you'd like. I have time. Gideon Marsh looked at his own folder and then looked at my father in the way attorneys look at clients. When they want to say something they can't quite say in the room. My father looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something in his face that I hadn't expected. Not anger, exactly. Something older than anger. Something that looked almost like discomfort. You're very prepared, he said finally. Like it surprised him. I've been preparing for a lot of things for a long time, I said. He didn't answer. Here is what my father didn't know about me. Because we had not been in the same room for 4 years, and before that only briefly at my grandmother's funeral, where we'd spoken for maybe 12 minutes. When I was 18, I enlisted, not because I didn't have options. I'd been accepted to NC State on a partial academic scholarship, but because I had spent years watching my mother stretch every dollar, and I didn't want to start my adult life in debt. and because something in me wanted to be tested in a way I couldn't fully explain at 18 and can barely explain now. I did 4 years enlisted. Then I applied for officer candidate school. Then I spent 5 years as a commissioned officer, specializing in intelligence, working assignments I still can't fully discuss in any room that isn't cleared. I had a security clearance that required a background investigation so thorough that investigators had spoken to people I'd known in middle school. I had also, in my 7th year of service, been part of a task force that received a commendation from a 3-star general. My name was in the official record. My service record was not a secret. It was the kind of thing that, if you knew how to look, you could find. Agnes Whitfield had known how to look. She had also, it turned out, mentioned this to a colleague of hers who sat on the board of a veterans legal aid organization, who happened to know a retired JAG colonel who had once worked with my commanding officer, which meant that when I walked into that conference room, there were people in that city who knew exactly who I was, even if my father did not. I didn't know any of that yet. What I did know was that the door opened about 20 minutes into the meeting, and Agnes walked in, unhurried, in a dark green blazer, reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and set her bag down beside me and said, "Sorry I'm late. Parking." She was not sorry. She had timed it exactly. She sat down, looked at Gideon Marsh with the professional courtesy of someone who had been doing this since before he finished law school, and said, "Shall we start over?" What followed was 2 hours of conversation that I will not fully recount here, because a lot of it was legal language and document review and the particular kind of tedium that serious proceedings require. But I'll tell you what it came down to. Gideon Marsh had done his homework on the trust and the financial accounts. What he had not done, what my father had not thought to ask him to do, was any homework on me. So when Agnes laid out the full picture, including my service record, including the commendation, including a brief note about the legal complexity of challenging an estate plan from a woman whose sole heirs had spent 9 years serving this country, Gideon Marsh got very quiet. He excused himself for 8 minutes. He came back and had a conversation with my father in the corner of the room that I could not fully hear but could read clearly enough in the set of my father's shoulders and the way he pressed the back of his hand against his mouth. When they sat back down, Gideon Marsh said, "My client would like to discuss a negotiated resolution regarding the joint account." My stepmother said nothing. She was looking out the window. Agnes said, "We're listening." The offer was, they would release any claim to the joint account in exchange for my signing a general release agreeing not to pursue any further legal action related to the estate. Agnes looked at me. I thought about my mother in a hospital bed on a Tuesday afternoon, watching old episodes of a British cooking show because she said the accents were soothing. I thought about her telling me, when I came home on leave and sat with her, that she wasn't afraid. "I just want to know you're taken care of," she said. "That's all I've ever wanted." I thought about the word my father had used. Courtesy. "Yes," I said. "We'll accept that." Gideon Marsh nodded. My father signed where he was directed to sign. He didn't look at me again. My stepmother stood up first. She was halfway to the door when she paused and turned, not quite meeting my eyes, and said, "I'm sorry about your mother." It was the first time she had ever said anything like that to me. "Thank you," I said. She left. My father followed. The door closed behind them with a soft click that seemed much quieter than it should have been. Agnes started gathering her papers. "Well," she said mildly, "that went about as expected." "You timed your entrance," I said. "I have no idea what you're talking about." She handed me a copy of the signed agreement. "You did well in there." I looked at the paper in my hands, the signatures, the date. I had not cried since my mother died. I'd been too busy, the arrangements, the notifications, the leave paperwork, the legal consultations. There had always been something to do, and I am the kind of person who fills grief with tasks, who processes things slowly and privately, usually alone at strange hours when I can't sleep. I thought I might cry now. Sitting in that conference room with the cold coffee smell and the afternoon light coming in sideways through the blinds. I didn't, but it was close. Agnes pretended not to notice, which is one of the things I appreciated most about her. I drove back to Fayetteville that evening. I stopped at the same gas station outside of Fayetteville and got another terrible cup of coffee and stood in the cold again. But this time I looked at my phone and saw a text from a friend on post, just checking in, just asking how it went. I typed back, "It went okay." She would have liked how it ended, and that was true. My mother would have liked it, not because of the money. She never cared about the money, except as something that represented choices, the ability to decide what happened next. She would have liked that I walked into that room alone and sat still and said what needed to be said without raising my voice. She would have liked that the truth was already in the record, already documented, already real, and that I hadn't needed to argue for it. I just needed to show up and let it speak. She taught me that, or maybe the military taught me that, or maybe both, or maybe it's just a thing you learn when you've spent enough time being underestimated. The quieter you stay, the louder the truth gets. I drove back in the dark with the radio on low. By the time I hit the base exit, I felt something loosen in my chest that I think had been tight for 11 weeks. My mother's house sold 6 months later. I used some of the proceeds to pay off my car. I put the rest in a high-yield savings account and left it there, growing slowly the way my mother would have done. I visit her grave when I'm home on leave. I bring her coffee, the good kind, from the place on Glenwood Avenue that she always said was too expensive, but that I bought for her anyway whenever I came to town. I don't know what my father thinks about any of this now. I stopped wondering about that a long time ago. He made his choices and I made mine, and the record of both is somewhere in a filing cabinet in Agnes Whitfield's office. And that is enough. What I know is this. My mother spent her whole life making sure I had something solid to stand on. She did it quietly, without asking for credit, without drama, in the margins of a difficult life that she lived with more grace than most people manage in easy ones. She left me more than money. She left me the understanding that who you are doesn't require anyone else's acknowledgement to be real, that the work you do in silence counts even when no one is watching, that you can walk into any room, a conference room, a courtroom, a room that smells like cold coffee and old contempt, and you don't have to prove yourself to people who have already decided not to see you. You just have to know what's in the record and make sure someone's kept good notes.